Welcome to an American Catechism and Stab the Dragon Productions for a special whiskey holiday edition. Coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas, where it is currently 83 degrees on Friday, August 29th, 2025, starting the Labor Day weekend. This is almost 20 degrees cooler today than yesterday, where it got up to 101. And this weekend, we're just going to celebrate that 3-day holiday known as Labor Day weekend. To help celebrate, I'll be giving a brief sketch of the history of Labor Day and a review of Seagram 7 Crown. Why Seagram 7? This whiskey is still widely sold and consumed. It is still rated in the top 20 of best-selling American whiskeys. Some lists have it as high as number 7 and others around 12. I consider this to be a working man's whiskey back in the day, but I do not see this whiskey talked about much in the whiskey community today. It just goes on selling though. So I'll start with a quick summary of Seagram 7 and then give a brief history of Labor Day and then the details of the whiskey review. So just the facts. This is an American blended whiskey that has 25% straight whiskeys in it and 75% neutral grain spirits. Coming in at about $14 a bottle for this 750 milliliter here in Fort Worth, I think it still has good value. Tasting notes. A little bit of corn sweetness, not much spiciness, maybe some vanilla, hints of wood. This is a pleasant drink. It just doesn't have the depth that a bourbon has, nor does it have the harshness. So I can see why this is so popular today. It has nice, gentle flavors, but lacks that harsh, bold nature that bourbons, ryes, or scotches have. Simple, perhaps, yeah. Maybe it has even just a hint of apple flavor in there. My score was 75, but the letter grade for drinkability, solid B. My recommendation. For those of you who want to drink a whiskey but are just a bit afraid of the harshness of bourbon or scotch, this is a very good starter. If you want a nice, refreshing, simple summer cocktail, the 7 and 7 cannot be beaten. It has good value for the price. All right, let's get into the Labor Day history. From 1885 to 87, there was a few cities and states that began to officially recognize a Labor Day on various days of the year. September 5th of 1882 was the first Labor Day parade in New York City, organized by the labor unions of the day. And then by 1884, 23 more states had a Labor Day. So in 1894, Congress set up the legal holiday of Labor Day for the first Monday of September, and President Grover Cleveland signed it into law. But you got to dig a little bit further down. Why did he sign it then? Earlier in that year, 1894, on May Day, and May Day is the International Day of Labor that comes from Europe, and Marxism had already started there and organized labor, and so May Day was the day of the year to celebrate organized labor. And in 1894, there had been some major riots across the nation's big cities protesting labor conditions. On May 11th, you get the Pullman strike and railroad strike that shut down Chicago. So President Grover Cleveland sent in army troops to break up the strike. Imagine that. After this harsh response to the strikes, the president wanted to sign the Labor Day law to appease the leftist workers, to kind of balance the scales a little bit. Now, prior to this, there were two names associated with the beginnings of the Labor Day movement. Peter J. McGuire, a secretary for the Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners, and co-founder of the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, in 1882. And then also a Matthew McGuire, and the McGuire names are spelled differently. So it's, it's not, they're not brothers. He was a machinist secretary of Local 344 in the International Association of Machinists in Paterson, New Jersey. And he had proposed a Labor Day holiday also in 1882. Now, for most of us today, Labor Day is simply a 3-day holiday that ends summer, starts fall, dove hunting season here in Texas begins, football at the NCAA, NFL, and high school levels all begins. But I think sometimes we need to look at our holidays a little bit more carefully. It's more than just a day off. And ask a few deeper questions and seek some answers, and then maybe share it with our kids and grandkids. Yes, the labor movement is rooted in Marxism, socialism, and communism, but the American labor movement has actually had some good, healthy successes along the way. Think about the 40-hour work week, ending child labor, getting some good wages and benefits, and safety regulations in the workplace. So the labor movement is a mixed blessing, and really labor and capital can only be straightened out with the help of our biblical Christian faith that teaches us in the Ten Commandments, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not covet. And Paul tells us in 2 Thessalonians 3:10, he who does not work shall not eat. And then you go back to the Old Testament in Leviticus 23:22, and it teaches the property owners to not reap to the very edges of their field or gather the gleanings of their harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God. So in other words, allow the opportunity for the poor to do some work to get their daily bread, to harvest what you don't harvest. And then you could think of the Old Testament book of Ruth and how she was gleaning in the fields. And so that's a biblical principle to encourage the poor to work. But man is a sinner, whether he is the business owner, the laborer, or the legislature and bureaucrat. And the gospel is needed to soften and regulate all the sides. All right, let's get on with our review of Seagram's 7. First of all, the history. Waterloo Distillery was founded in 1857 in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, by William Hespeler. Joseph Seagram was an employee, then he became a part owner and partner, and then he became the sole owner in 1883. He and his sons turned the distillery into a huge success with the creation of Seagram's VO whiskey in 1907, which became the largest selling Canadian whiskey. Joe Seagram died in 1919, and his sons sold the distillery in 1928 to Samuel Bronfman, who kept the name Seagram's. During Prohibition, they continued to stockpile whiskey, and Bronfman became associated with bootleggers and smuggling. So Seagram's 7 was then created by Bronfman in 1934 at the end of Prohibition as a smooth, tasty, blended whiskey specifically geared for the American palate. Today, 7 Crown is owned by Diageo, a British company. And this whiskey has consistently been in the top 10 or 20 whiskeys for decades down to today. I vaguely remember the Seagram's brand from my childhood, I think magazine ads and hunting magazines or Popular Science or Mechanics or news magazines, things like that my parents subscribed to. So for history, 5 of 5 points. Bottle, label, and marketing. The bottle is fairly plain, but it has dark brown glass with a plastic screw-on cap. I tend to like colored glass, even though some say it's designed to hide the pale color of some whiskeys. 7 Crown is actually darker than you would think. Let me hold the glass up here. So, I don't think the brown glass is hiding anything. I mean, that's darker than some scotches I've seen. The label is old school, which I like. Kind of harkens back to yesteryear, and it's a bit bold and imposing. But, look at this. There's a crown right there, which would make sense for the name, Seagram 7 Crown, and the fact that it was originally from Canada, but it's just kind of odd that an American blended whiskey has got a British crown on it. That's interesting. So I do see this whiskey all over the place, even though it's really never discussed in the online whiskey groups that I'm a part of. And I've not seen an ad, since I was a kid in the 60s or 70s. But I then did a research on YouTube for Seagram 7 ads, and I actually found several dating back over the last 4 or 5 years, including immediately after COVID. And the ads were well done. I think they were high quality ads, pretty brief, about 14, 15, 16 seconds, something like that. And so I thought they were nice and effective. They emphasized the smoothness of the whiskey, and the 7 and 7 cocktail was highlighted in almost all of the ads. There are also way more YouTube reviews of this whiskey than I had expected, including Rex and Daniel over at the Whiskey Vault. So, for bottle, label, and marketing, 4 out of 5 points. Appearance of the whiskey. Again, here in the glass, it's darker than I would have thought. This is a 3. It's a light 3, but 3 out of 5 points. Kind of a golden color, I would say. Composition of this whiskey. As an American blended whiskey, this is, I think the law says it's got to have 20% straight whiskeys in there, which means straight whiskeys have to be 2 years old or older. And labeling laws, if you're going to be anything other than 4 years old, you got to put the number of years on there. And so this may include 4-year-old whiskeys, perhaps. But if only 20% is required, Seagram's has got 25% straight whiskeys and 75% neutral grain spirits. So that's the difference between an American blended whiskey and like a bourbon. So this does have essentially vodka in here. The bottle says it was blended and bottled in Norwalk, Connecticut. I'm sorry. And this is 80 proof. So this comes from Connecticut. Now, historically, I know that the distillery in Lawrenceburg that's been MGP for years originally was a Bronfman distillery, and I think that's where they made this originally. So I'm not sure why it's now made in Connecticut. I don't have that information. 9 out of 15 for composition. On to the nose. It's got a very pleasant nose. And the fact that I can smell it is amazing because my nose is just so broken. I can barely smell a lot of whiskeys. But this one immediately, I get a pleasant corn sweetness on the nose. Maybe a bit flowery. Grain. Perhaps a hint of wood. Maybe a slight touch of apple. Pleasant nose. Still a little bit faint, but the fact that I can smell it's amazing. And it smells nice. So really, 8 points out of 10, and my standard score is 7 when I can't smell a whiskey. So 8 out of 10 for the nose. All right, on to the taste. Some corn sweetness. Not much in the way of spiciness, maybe just a little bit. Some hints of vanilla, and I think perhaps a little bit of wood. It's a very pleasant drink. It does not have the depth of a bourbon, nor the harshness. So I can see why this is so popular, actually. It's got nice flavors and lacks that bold nature that bourbons or scotches or ryes have. So it's a little bit simple. I get, fruit wise, maybe a touch of apple in here. And in fact, Seagram's does come out with an apple whiskey. So really, I mean, there's nothing bad here. Nothing really shocking or bad. 19 of 25. How about the mouthfeel, burn, and finish? It's only 80 proof, but it doesn't really feel thin to me on the palate. Maybe low medium. Does give you a nice mouth tingle. So you're drinking whiskey, but again, it just doesn't have the strong burn. Nothing going up, nothing going down. Just stays in the mouth or the back of the throat. Little bit of burn, tingle, but not much more than that. There's not really any long lingering finish. The flavors disappear fairly quickly. But what does linger, the mouth tingles linger. Just a hint of the corn sweetness, I think, is there. So 8 out of 15 for mouthfeel, burn, and finish. What about mixing it? I specifically bought this a few years ago for the 7 and 7 cocktail. So let me go make one real quick and bring it back. I am back with the classic 7 and 7. There you go. Now, even though I was saying I was getting hints of apple on the nose and on the taste, I chose to put lemon because 7-Up is kind of a lemon lime drink. And sure enough, the lemon absolutely enhances this. Gave my wife the first sip and she really liked it. So this is and she's not really a whiskey girl, but this is one that she could drink. So she really enjoys it. And again, for those who may be skittish of bourbons or scotches, this is the way to go right here. So as far as the neat or mixture, this gets a 4 out of 5. Again, it's still a very simple drink. You would not use this whiskey to make, I don't think, any complex drinks. Although I suppose you could. I just wouldn't. Price, value, and availability. Goody Goody has it for $12.99. Specs for $14.73 and Total Wine for $13.99. So again, this is about a $14 whiskey. And that's a great price with a solid value for a lot of people. And it's clearly highly available. So, however, I want to note this. A bottle of Jim Beam bourbon only costs $1 more than this. Evan Williams 86 proof black label, $1 less than this. So, you're looking at some bourbons that cost in the same range as this, but bourbon's not for everybody. This can meet that need. So price, value, and availability, 9 points out of 10. Bonus. I was just really surprised by this when I bought it a couple of years ago. This is inexpensive, blended whiskey, but really pretty good. So 4 out of 5 bonus points. I really like the history, the bottle, the label, everything about it. Giving me a total score of 75 points, which is fairly low. Letter grade for drinkability, solid B. My analysis and recommendation. This is a simple, tasty drink with almost a built-in cocktail with the 7 and 7. It is well-liked historically, and as gentle as it is, it's likely to last much longer, coming up on its centennial anniversary in less than 10 years. It's very likely a lot of bars and restaurants will stock this as their well whiskey. Again, I purchased this just a few years ago for the 7 and 7 cocktail. And first one that I made, really enjoyed. My wife liked it. We both like it. So I was frankly surprised at how good it was neat when I tried it neat. Because I'm a bourbon drinker and ryes and scotches. So I was a little bit leery of the high vodka content here, but now I absolutely see why it's been so popular for so long. If bourbons and scotches scare you off, try the Seagram 7 for a very smooth, tasty introductory whiskey. And who doesn't enjoy a 7 and 7 once in a while? Now, will I buy another bottle when this one is done? Possibly. If I was out and about and I was offered a glass, I wouldn't turn it down. If I was offered a bottle free, if I had room in my cabinet, I would gladly accept it. I think the first time I had this actually was at a friend's wedding. It was served at the bar, complimentary, and bartender was working for tips, and so there you go. Got my first Seagram 7. Next up, on Labor Day, Monday, I'm going to try to do a review of this movie, On the Waterfront, starring Marlon Brando. And also I'll be sipping this bourbon because September 1st begins National Bourbon Heritage Month. And so we'll be focusing on bourbons in the month of September. But there will also be a few special features throughout the month. The United States Air Force birthday is in September. And also on this channel, I hope to begin my study of the Vikings as they relate to American history. So for now, and for Seagram 7, this is Stab the Dragon and American Catechism out here.